Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with colleagues. As we indicated, this is a conversation about safety of journalists in West Africa in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the first in the series of webinars that we would be convening. And for this particular edition, we are looking at the situation in Anglophone West Africa. Next week, we will have our colleagues in the Francophone zone addressing the issues of safety of journalists. As we all know, no one was prepared for a pandemic like this, and suddenly we've all been engulfed by it. As a result of it, we know that the work of journalists and media have become perhaps more important than ever before. But as journalists also go about doing their work, we are noticing increasing attacks, harassment, abuses, detention, and so on across the region. And perhaps it is a phenomenon that is happening across the world. So those of us here in West Africa, fortunately, we have some of you dealing with the issues at the national level on day-to-day basis, trying to protect journalists, trying to promote media freedom, trying to promote media sustainability, even as the challenges are so pervasive. And so we thought that it's important that we come together, share our ideas, look at the national context, learn about the environment more, and collectively brainstorm on how we can support our journalists to be safe, how we can support our media organizations to be safe. And so perhaps I would let you, first of all, introduce yourselves, even though as a moderator, I know we are having Sowa from Sierra Leone, we are having Lanre from Nigeria, and we are having George from Ghana. Sometimes, in order not to mispronounce your last names, it is better you introduce yourselves. And so I will start with Sowa, basically your full name and your organization and possibly your designation. So over to you, Sowa.
Thank you very much, Sule. Like you rightly said, I am Francis Sowa. I am from Sierra Leone, and at present, I am the chairman of the Media Reform Coordinating Group, MRCG, an institution that brings together 10 national media organizations working on press freedom and capacity building of media practitioners across Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much, Sowa. And somebody would say, how about myself? My name is Sulemana Braimah, and I'm the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. So, Mr. Lanre. Lanre, if you can hear me, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you. My name is Lanre Arogundade. I'm the executive. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Lanre Arogundade. I'm the executive director of International Press Center, Lagos in Nigeria, IPC. IPC is into capacity building for journalists, and we are also advocates for press freedom and freedom of expression.
Thank you so much, Lanre. George, can you briefly let people know who you are? George, can you hear me? Hello, George. If you can hear me, a brief introduction.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is George Sarpong. I'm the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission, which is created by the Constitution of Ghana to promote freedom and independence of the media and to secure high journalistic standards.
Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for agreeing to share your experience and your expertise with us this afternoon. And I would also want to welcome all our participants and to say thank you very much for also sharing your time with us. Now, to start with, I would go to Sierra Leone and have Sowa take through, in just 5 minutes, what the context has been, the context of safety of journalists in Sierra Leone since the outbreak of the pandemic about 2 or 3 months ago. So, Sowa, what has been the context of safety of journalists in Sierra Leone?
All right, thank you very much, Sulemana. In providing the context, I would like to start by saying that Sierra Leone registered its first index case of COVID-19 on the 31st of March this year. It was described as an imported case because it was a man who came from France on the 16th of March, who was quarantined, and at the end of the period, it turned out that he was positive. So the country recorded its first case on the 31st of March 2020. To date, as we are speaking, the last update clearly says that the country has 585 confirmed cases. 585 confirmed cases. So that's what we have by way of numbers. Now, the context in terms of the media's response to COVID-19, even before Sierra Leone registered its first case of COVID-19, there was a national broadcast by His Excellency the President of Sierra Leone, where he urged all public and private media to continually broadcast and reinforce messages on public health education, on the coronavirus, to ensure prevention at that time. So that suggests some sort of collaboration which the government was calling for. And to some extent, it also seemed to suggest that there was a call supporting the safety of journalists, because the president could not have called on media institutions to support the fight against COVID-19 if their safety was not going to be guaranteed. So therefore, by way of context, we also saw the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists, the umbrella body of journalists in Sierra Leone, launched a coordinated approach in terms of the coverage on COVID-19. That approach was similar to what SLAG did during the Ebola in 2014. So this time around, SLAG launched what it called the Corona Response Committee. And clearly, the objective of that committee was to coordinate SLAG response to the fight against coronavirus in Sierra Leone. So SLAG has been interfacing with the Ministry of Information, with the Ministry of Health, all towards providing and disseminating information, education, sensitization, and awareness of COVID-19. Now, we go to the issue of safety of journalists, the context. A state of public emergency was declared in Sierra Leone on the 24th of March by His Excellency the President. That was even before Sierra Leone registered any case of COVID-19. So there were concerns that, as George, who is a lawyer, would say, that during a state of emergency, there are some restrictions to the rights people should enjoy. So generally, the Constitution, which is a ground norm, which provides the entire legal framework, was used to invoke a state of emergency pursuant to Section 29 of the Constitution of Sierra Leone, Act number 6 of 1991. So generally, that was the first thing that happened, that a state of emergency was declared, and then generally concerns came as to enjoyment of freedom. But however, I must make the point, there has been no specific regulation on COVID-19 hindering the safety of journalists. There has been no specific regulation, even where by the same section 29, the government may come up with regulations. But so far, there has been no regulation, just that there's a state of emergency in place, which presupposes that certain rights will be limited or will be restricted. So the Sierra Leone Association, yes.
Right. So I think that we would get the opportunity to go into the other issues in terms of policy, legislation, government actions, and also interventions by journalists association and other media support organizations. But if that's fine, we would go to Lanre in Nigeria, because Nigeria has been perhaps the hot spot, not for the coronavirus, I must say, in the region, but for violations and abuses against journalists. We've had cases where state governors are ordering the arrest of journalists in many states. We've had a case where security forces have rounded up journalists in the journalist union offices, and so many other cases. In fact, journalists who have been incarcerated as a result of their work around COVID-19. So Lanre, in 5 minutes, can you give us the general context in Nigeria as far as the safety of journalists and the coronavirus is concerned? Lanre, if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, thank you very much. I think for Nigeria, if we talk about the context, we need to look at the context of COVID-19 in general before we zero in on how that has impacted on the safety of journalists. In this regard, I've identified 3 important contexts to this discussion. The first is that the Nigerian media and journalists, as elsewhere in parts of West Africa, are witnessing and reporting a pandemic for the time in their life, irrespective of age. Now, this is because the last known pandemic that affected Nigeria as a country, in which about 500,000 Nigerians were supposed to have died, was way back in 1918 to 1920. So in a sense, the media, like the government of Nigeria and the society as a whole, was caught unawares, and we could actually say was unprepared, both in terms of capacity and resources. In other words, media in Nigeria, there's no blueprint of a pandemic to copy from. The second context is that prior to COVID-19 or pre-COVID-19, the civic space in Nigeria was already shrinking. And within that space, press freedom space in particular was actually shrinking fast. You will recall that during the 2019 elections, for example, there were so many instances of the violation of the rights of journalists and attacks on the media as a whole. Apart from the elections, as a result of the war against Boko Haram, journalists have faced incessant assaults from the security agencies, especially the army and the police. So we have this the fact that the press freedom space was already shrinking prior to the COVID-19. And then it will now seem as if the strict conditions that came with COVID-19, because as you know, in Lagos, in Abuja, the federal capital, and in Ogun State, we had the total lockdown for a period of time. And we have had different forms of lockdown in different states. As we speak today, COVID-19 has infected citizens in 35 of Nigeria's 36 states, including the federal capital. So what I'm saying in essence is that the response to this lockdown seemed to have reinforced the attacks, on journalists. Say that as the security agents cover to continue their hostility towards the media. The third context, which I think is important, is that pre-COVID-19 or prior to COVID-19, the media economic shifts arising from the economic situation in the country, but other acts of recklessness as of proprietors, that the welfare rights of journalists already been violated. Now, COVID-19 has thrown the media into more economic dire straits and compounded already bad situation. And this has posed some threat to journalists in terms of their welfare. So this is the context in which we find ourselves when it comes to COVID-19. And in view of this context, against this background, one of the first things that the International Press Center did when the COVID-19 came out, or we had the outbreak, was to come up with an advisory for journalists, an advisory on COVID-19 reporting. That advisory has 3 important sections. The first has to do with the safety of the individual journalists themselves. The second has to do with our ethical and professional responsibilities, as well as our social responsibility in reporting the pandemic. We did that against this background, which I've outlined, of the fact that this was something that was, the COVID-19 itself is novel, but the experience itself for Nigerian journalists is novel. So it's within this context that we can now talk about various emerging issues, including the attacks on journalists, including violation of the individual rights of journalists and the attitude of government. I must say that if you look at the pronouncements, you could say that there is a recognition of the role of the media in fighting the pandemic. In one of his presidential broadcasts, for example, President Buhari did make the point that the media as frontline workers were helping. Then later on, the Minister of Information, Mr. Lai Mohammed, when there was this issue of how this lockdown would affect journalists, said that journalists who had their identity cards should be allowed free movement. In spite of this, we have had all these instances which you yourself outlined, which means that there's not been a translation of these pronouncements into concrete action on the part of state actors. And to that extent, we have had a series of violations, some of which I would say, in conclusion, have been quite bizarre. First, we had the instance of a state governor, David Umahi of Ebonyi State, who ordered 2 journalists detained because of the reports they were filing on COVID-19, and followed that with an announcement that they were being banned for life from reporting in that state. We have the case of a general manager of a state newspaper, the Tide newspapers in Rivers State, who was dismissed because the newspaper published a report on the first index case in the state. We have recently the case of a female journalist in Imo State who was with the State Broadcasting Corporation and who wrote on her Facebook, who expressed concern on her Facebook page that salaries of journalists had not been paid for 3 months. And of course, she has been put on suspension. And just about 2 days ago, or thereabouts, we had the instance of many journalists being arrested because the police claimed they were enforcing a curfew. So this is the situation we find ourselves. And I would say that this provides a context to what we are experiencing.
Right. Thank you very much. I think your contextual analysis highlights the role that support organizations such as the IPC, MRCG, the Media Foundation, and others in the region have. And we would come later to the role that we have to play and whether we have been playing that role and what challenges exist and so on and so forth. George, you are in a different, you're wearing a different cap. You are, of course, an activist. You are somebody who, of course, you've worked with the Media Foundation before in the past, and so that activism and that spirit of protecting the media is within you. But you also sit at the regulatory body, and the National Media Commission in Ghana is often regarded as a model for many of the countries in the region. So both in terms of the context and in terms of the regulatory point of view, what will be your initial comments and analysis of the issues?
Thank you very much, Sule, for the opportunity.
George, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first, I want to thank you and our colleagues at the Foundation for those wonderful initiatives, and to congratulate our colleagues Francis and Lanre for such insightful reflections. For us at the Media Commission and generally for regulators, I think the first dilemma or the first challenge that we had to face was, first of all, how do you secure the physical safety of journalists in a period of pandemic? 2, how to keep democracy healthy in a pandemic? And 3, how do you ensure a kind of context that enables journalists and the media to contribute towards shaping the post-pandemic society? And all of these are within the framework of media's role in fulfilling the public interest, which we understand to be indivisible within a context like this. And the reason why this is important is that what all of us know is that in the face of physical threats, values and notions of rights become abstract to people, even the ordinary citizens that we work for, as much as the state. So when the state takes on the overarching role of being the public protector, there's a certain feeling that the state is entitled to the application of all resources within the state in the fight against the pandemic, including the media. And therefore, any attempt by the media to play its watchdog role in terms of even how the state performs within this context is seen or can easily be seen as an attempt to undermine the state. So that is the context within which we are discussing this. Plus the very fact that we also need to think about the safety of journalists and their work. So whilst we are thinking about their physical safety, you are also thinking about the safety of their employment within the complexity of the economy. And I think in the case of Ghana, what we can say for sure is that we have largely experienced a free environment for the practice of journalism. We have seen that media's contribution towards the fight has been enormous. I think that there has been political recognition for that. The president, his minister for information, and the team working on COVID have had to work considerably with the media. The minister is holding regular press conferences that they have to rely on the media to carry. Keep in mind that we are doing all these things under periods where first we had a lockdown, second noticed some instances of disquiet. Sule would recall that the foundation itself had been involved in, so we'll find time to talk about that. But some of the specific instances of attack, we saw the case of Ganiwi in Kumasi and another case, something in Kumasi. In both cases, what had been the case was that the military or security forces had considered the coverage or the work of the journalists as interfering in their work, either in terms of the content they carry or because of their physical presences at certain locations. And some of the outcomes have not been palatable. We have also seen concerns about threats to use some extant laws to regulate media content, particularly those that security forces consider as bordering on fake news. And these are some of the concerns that perhaps, if there is time, we'd want to talk a bit more about.
Thank you very much, George, for those insights. And it's great to at least have this context. And we know, for example, that apart from Nigeria, Liberia has also been recording quite a considerable number of violations. But we don't have a panelist from Liberia, but if any of the participants are from Liberia, please, you are welcome to share your comments or your thoughts, and you can put those up in the chat box and we would pass it on to either the panelists or my colleagues here at the foundation can respond to it. Now, one critical thing has been the role of the security agencies, and I think that just when you were ending, you alluded to that. And I think from Nigeria, in Ghana, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and in the Francophone countries, all these actions have been perpetrated by, in Anglophone countries, mainly the police, and in Francophone countries, mainly the gendarmeries. Now, Mr. Sowa, what has been the relationship between the media and security agencies in Sierra Leone as far as the safety of journalists is concerned? Has it been one of animosity? Has it been one of cooperation? And I'm asking this because you are very much aware. We have, in collaboration with MRCG, in the last year, had fruitful discussions with the security agencies when it comes to media and relations with the security agencies as far as their safety is concerned. But within the context of COVID-19, what has been the attitude of the security agencies towards journalist safety?
All right, thank you very much, Sulemana. I'm going to start
my... you could hear me.
Yes, I can. Are you getting me?
Hello, Sowa.
Yes, hello, I'm getting
Lanre, if you can hear me, if you would want to take that question. And again,
hello?
Nigeria. Okay.
Sule.
Hello, hello, Sule.
Sule, can you hear me?
I'm getting you. Hello, Sule.
Yes.
Sule, are you getting me?
I can hear Sowa, but it looks like you can't hear him.
Yeah.
Sule, you have to check your line.
Sowa, we can hear you. I think you should go ahead.
Yes, I think Sule has a problem. Okay, Sule, let me start by responding to that question based on what has happened in the past. Like you had pointed out at the peak of the 2018 elections, with support from MFWA, our organization had a meeting with the police. So generally over the years, I can say there had been improved collaboration between the media and the police. That is not to say there have not been instances of fracas between some police officers and journalists. Of course, the trend has always been that at the top hierarchy, heads of security sector institutions will always appear to have a better understanding of the operations of journalists. Sometimes it appears as if those good layers of relationship, they do not filter down to the men on the field. So for example, even here in Sierra Leone, going to an instance of a case, there's a major case of Faya Amaya Faya, who on the 4th of April 2000 was reportedly beaten by military officers in Kenema. And his attack was related to COVID-19 because he was covering a story relating to a quarantine home. And Sludge put out a press release in which was headlined, Sludge condemns state-sanctioned brutality against journalists. Enough is enough. So even here in Sierra Leone, we had an instance in which a journalist came under serious attack whilst covering a matter of COVID-19. And in the case of Fire, according to the Sludge press release, he was not only beaten by about 9 military officers while in his course of duty, he was also taken to the Kenema police station. And it was very clear that at the time he was at the police station, his health condition was not good. Later, he spent the lockdown. We have had 2 lockdowns as a country during the course of Corona. But unlike other countries, we only had 3 days. He had to spend the first lockdown in police custody. And later, he was charged to court. In fact, as we are talking, that matter is still in court. So granted, it did not happen with police officers per se, but it involved state security officials, in this case, military officials. So like Nigeria or Liberia or in Ghana, that matter was a very serious one, considering the fact that the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists had taken a collaborative approach in terms of dealing with COVID-19. So SLAD, for example, sits on a number of committees, including the one at the Ministry of Information. SLAD had established a whole Corona Response Committee. SLAD is doing nationwide radio programs that are simulcast. SLAD is doing television programs, all as part of its social responsibility. But in all of this, when that matter came up, the association approached key officials in the government, and the matter was taken to the police station. Charges were preferred, and like I said, the matter is now before a competent court of law. So even with the collaboration the journalists have had with the government, that has not spared at least one case of attack on the journalist. So all of these things are happening against the backdrop that you have, there's a key problem of trust between journalists and some security sector institutions. There are some people in the rank and file of security sector institutions who believe that media practitioners create a lot of problems for them while they are doing their work. Even with the case of fire in Kenema, you will realize that the military people, they are saying that it was sort of obstructing their work, because here was a quarantine home. These journalists suspected that something was happening there, and then the security officers believed that it was the presence of the journalists themselves, it was not alone, constituted some kind of challenge to their work. So he was arrested and then taken to court. Now, what is important in all of this is that we have not had any standard approach in terms of dealing with the issues of safety and security of journalists during COVID-19. What we have had was an ad hoc approach. So we have the Independent Media Commission here in Sierra Leone, for example, coming up with lots of statements stressing the need for the safety and security of journalists. We have had the Sierra Leone Reporters Union, SLRU, had put out a notice and also some guidelines that should ensure the safety and security of journalists. So efforts are being made, but the challenges relating to trust, having a very good relationship between the media and state security officials always seem to be good at the higher level, but when it comes down to operations, it poses a challenge. The attack on Amaya Fire was the major one because it was a reported beating. Over and above that, even during the lockdown, there were serious concerns from journalists that they did not have access to go out. There were cases or there were issues about passes, that journalists did not get enough pass to go and monitor what was happening during the 3-day lockdown because people were asked to stay home. But even during that 3-day lockdown, in terms of the role we play, we saw that Sierra Leone Association of Journalists and the Independent Radio Network, IRN, they organized over 12 hours of radio broadcasts across the country, bringing news and information to people about the danger of COVID-19. And at that point, we also saw the positive relationship between police, the military, and journalists, because the police officers, the military officers used the IRN platform, the SLAT platform, the radio programs, to talk to people about the need to adhere to social distancing issues, to things like staying at home, to things like abiding by the rules and regulations. So in conclusion, the COVID-19 itself, the interaction between the journalists and the state officials, at some point you will see that there may be some kinds of negative effects, by way of attack, in the case of fire, Amara fire, but at other points, the very situation provided a forum where journalists, by way of SLAG, had been meeting with security sector institutions, creating the very platform for them to reach the wider populace.
Right. Thank you very much, Sowa. I would go now to Lanre in Nigeria. And Lanre, the Nigerian situation is quite also unique in the context of who the perpetrators of violence against journalists are. We have had instances where it involves the state security service officials. We've had instances where it involves environmental task force people being the ones abusing the journalists. We've had cases where it is the police, and we've actually had a number of cases where state governors are either issuing arrest warrants or banning people from reporting in their states, or actually causing journalists to be detained, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the actors, those who perpetrate these violence against journalists, in the Nigerian context, it is not just the police, but all these different actors. What has been the situation, and media actors such as IPC, MRA, and the others, what has been the response to these different groups of people and actors, threatening journalists and, sometimes visiting violence on them?
Well, thank you very much. I think in terms of the actors, our report shows that the major perpetrators are security agents, the police and the soldiers, and like you said, in some cases, environmental task force personnel. But we must also stress that in some cases, these people are actually acting on the instructions of those who have political authority. So I've mentioned the instance of Mboyi State in Nigeria, where two journalists, one working for Vanguard, Peter, the other one working for Sun newspaper, Chijioke, were arrested on the orders of the state governor. So ordinarily, you would say that they were assaulted by the security agents, but the instruction came from the political authority in the states. The same thing in some other states. In fact, we already have a case where somebody has been held for over a week now, allegedly on the instructions of the Minister of Information of the country. Now, this is where the problem arises, where you have a state officials taking this position. And I have this feeling that it is this political attitude that has informed the conduct of the security agents when they are related with journalists. That would explain why, despite the fact that journalists have been recognized as frontline workers, frontline professionals, men, female and male journalists, they were still being prevented from moving during the curfew, just a couple of days ago. So that is the problem. Now, we must also stress the fact that at the highest level of government, the role of the media is not well factored into the mechanisms with which they are fighting COVID-19. So, for example, you have the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. It is a task force, but even at that, one would have expected that that task force would include health communication experts, would include the media, as represented, for example, by the proprietors in the print and broadcast sector, or by the Guild of Editors, and indeed the Nigerian Union of Journalists. The absence of that, I think, has contributed to a number of communication problems in terms of not understanding that at all times, the media has a role to play in this COVID-19 fight. Even if you are imposing a curfew, the media has to be there to report whether this curfew is effective or not. That has been, the situation. So to that extent, we have documented several instances of attacks, and not less than 20 journalists have had one form of harassment or the other in the course of reporting COVID-19. As to the question of what has been our response, I already mentioned the fact that in the early days, we did come out with an advisory on reporting of COVID-19, where we try to sensitize journalists to their own safety. Because part of the safety issue really is not just about the violation of the rights of journalists, it's also the fact that journalists have been exposed to danger. As we speak, not less than 4 journalists have had COVID-19 infection, including an editor, including the general manager of a broadcast station. But we thank God that so far, no life has been lost. So this is another aspect of safety of journalists we need to talk about. Now, in terms of response, of course, just like George said, we've issued several press statements. And at a stage, we just felt like, look, how many press statements are you going to issue? Because as you are issuing one, as you are sending one to the press, information is coming from your field monitors, press freedom monitor, another journalist has been arrested. So there are days where we have to issue 2-3 press statements simply because journalists have been arrested. So at a stage, we felt that we need to also use the instrumentality of the law to fight for the rights of journalists. And that was why when that governor I talked about earlier said he was banning 2 journalists from that state, the Partnership for Media and Democracy in Nigeria, comprising Media Rights Agenda and International Press Center, decided to test the law. We wrote a petition to the Code of Conduct Bureau asking it to investigate that statement and asking it to remove the governor because abuse of office includes when you will violate the rights of journalists. All governors in Nigeria take a oath of office. And in that oath, they say that they would abide with the Constitution. The Constitution recognizes the fundamental rights of citizens. So when they did this, we took that step, and that petition is still pending before the Code of Conduct Bureau. Of course, we are also encouraging engagements with state actors, especially the offices that deal with media in some of the security agencies, like the Force PRO. We feel that is also quite important. And apart from IPCMRA, other media organizations, the AUJ and others, at different points in time, as well as the Nigerian Guild of Editors, have also issued statements to condemn attacks on journalists in Nigeria. Now, one other thing that we have also done is to commission a survey among journalists covering COVID-19 themselves. What are their experiences on the field? What safety issues are they facing? What are their challenges? What would they like their employers to do for them that is not being done now? In the course of doing this, we have also observed that for the journalists themselves, they are coming up with responses that show that their safety is not being well taken care of. So, in one of the surveys that was commissioned by IPC, Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, Enough is Enough Nigeria, the International Center for Investigative Reporting, and the Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalists, we asked about 500 journalists what their experience is. What would they like to have, and they are lacking. And majority of them, in all their responses, talked about the fact that for their safety to be well assured in covering COVID-19, they would need additional monetary allowance separate from their regular salaries, which some of them are being owed anyway. They talked about the special COVID-19 insurance package, specialized training on COVID-19 reporting, provision of face masks, and provision of specialized equipment to enable social distancing while on the field, amongst others. This was what the survey revealed. This came from journalists on the field themselves. Before then, we also had a survey at the level of the Nigerian Democratic Report with editors. What has been your experience? The experience has been that they are facing enormous challenges. One thing we can say of the media, for me just to pause here, in Nigeria, is the fact that there has been an attempt to robustly report COVID-19, but the information flow from government has not been there. And on the surface, you would think that they just want the media to be limited to the reporting of the briefings by the presidential task force, by the state government. But for journalists now to carry out independent investigations, to look at the broader issues of accountability in COVID-19 management because of the monies that are being raised to fight it, I think we are facing a number of obstacles here. But the response from the media support, civil society groups, have been quite encouraging, although we have this feeling too that other segments of the society, other sectors are not speaking out for the media. And I think that this is where we've seen some shortcomings. Those of us who speak out regularly take actions at the level of media or media support organizations. And I've challenged other civil society groups that work with the media, whether you work in the health sector, whether you work in the sector of people living with disability. You all use the media. And at this point in time that the media is facing these enormous challenges, we need more voices from the society to speak for the media.
Right. Thank you very much, Lanre. That was quite insightful. I think people are sending in comments about what can journalists themselves do, what can media organizations themselves do to stay safe and protect themselves. And I think that would be one of the issues that we'll be looking at. But the other point of interest is the government interventions. Here in Ghana, and I believe in a number of countries, the media and journalists have been recognized as frontline actors. And so when there was even lockdown, the media was exempted. But we are also very well aware of interventions by government to support frontline workers, whether it is the provision of PPEs, safety equipment, and so on and so forth, for health workers, security agencies, and so on and so forth. What has been the situation? George, if you can share with us, sitting at the media regulator, what has been the situation in Ghana in terms of government's efforts to also support the media to do their work while staying safe?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the National Media Commission, together with the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, the Ghana Journalists Association, and the Private Newspaper Publishers Association, petitioned His Excellency the President. The President convened a meeting between ourselves and himself and his officials to discuss these. And the President has given very concrete assurance that he's going to do whatever he can to support the media in that respect. But concretely, some of the things that were requested from him was, one, the provision of personal protective equipment for journalists on the front lines, like the health workers and the security services. He says he'll look into that. One of the key things that the broadcasters requested for was a waiver of regulatory fees and the spectrum fees for the year. Again, the government says it will look into that. We have, for the state-owned media, we have requested for budgetary support to enable them to do their work because they have come under considerable economic stress. Again, the government has promised to look into that. For individual journalists, we have asked for an insurance policy support that the government says they are also looking into. But quickly, let me also add that the government has already provided some face mask and hand gloves through the GJA and the other associations to be distributed to members. The other thing that we need to put on the table is that in the case of Ghana, Sule, your personal self, the foundation, the Ministry of Information, and a couple of stakeholders, including the National Media Commission, had already started work towards a framework for the safety of journalists before COVID hit. That intervention is still on the table for discussions, and COVID has only provided another context why we need to work together very quickly on that. And the government has given concrete assurance towards that. Let us also inform our colleagues that in the heat of the COVID pandemic, at least in one specific instance in the Volta region, one local administrator, we call the district chief executives here, sought to close down a radio station. The Ministry of Communications, together with the National Communications Authority, intervened to politely draw his attention that he did not have the authority to do what he was seeking to do, even though he thought that as also chairman for the District Security Council, he had a responsibility to safeguard the security and the law and order in the community, and sought to claim that the work of that particular radio station was undermining local security. So these are some of the things going on. But at the same time, you would recall that His Excellency the President in his address has repeatedly drawn attention to fake news and its destabilizing effect on the fight against the pandemic. One of the fears that has brought is a certain attempt by the security forces to rely on a law in the Electronic Communications Act to, as it were, seek to arrest and prosecute people under that legislation. I think there is a certain degree of nervousness and anxiety about the applicability of that law in the context of the fight against the pandemic. The real danger, though, is that it appears the generality of the society believe very strongly that in the context within which we work, a ceding of human rights and the protection of public health is a legitimate end. And therefore, much of the discussions that you hear would appear to support any extreme measures that political authorities would take. And that is why yourself, myself, and all as we have in the totality of West Africa and also in Ghana, we need to lose our guard on any issue.
Right. Thank you very much. We will be moving soon to solutions in terms of what can we do as actors in the field to help promote the safety of journalists. But Lanre, there is a question here for you, which says that in a country as large and heterogeneous as Nigeria, there are huge differences in the way that governors act and journalists are treated. Do you have a database of malpractices towards journalists? That's the first question. Can you use a naming and shaming approach to rogue governors who mistreat journalists? And if not, what approach can be used to stop this maltreatment? I think, Lanre, you would take that, and that would launch us into trying to go into the solutions. How do we tackle the menace of abuses against journalists and protect journalist safety? So Lanre, that's a question from Judith to you.
Okay, thanks Sule, and thank you Judith for the question. Yes, indeed, we do have a database of attacks on journalists and the perpetrators. Some of the information I was providing, I was taking it from the database that we have. Of course, we're still updating the database because Nigeria, as you recognize, is a very big country. In some cases, some journalists will have spent days in detention before we're even aware. So we're constantly updating the database, and we do have that. Now, in terms of naming and shaming, we haven't gotten to that. But like I said earlier on, one of the things we think we should do is to look at the law. Does the law give these governors the power to do some of the things that they are doing? And we feel no. So that was why we took that step of filing that petition before the Code of Conduct Bureau to say that by taking atrocious steps against journalists, this abusing his office, and asking that on that basis, should remove areas that we've not really been looking into. The fact that we are not totally helpless. Individual journalists, because some of them work with state governors or state governments, may not be able to take some of these actions. But as the level of media support grows, we can initiate such collaborative efforts. So I would say that while naming and shaming cannot be ruled out, but let us also make use of the institutions that we have now. Apart from the Code of Conduct Bureau, we have the National Human Rights Commission. Notice says that the Guild of Editors, the NUJ, the International Press Center, and others, even non-media organizations cannot go to the National Human Rights Commission to say that, to challenge the actions of some of these governors who are violating the rights of journalists. And that is the kind of thing that I feel that we need to do, going forward, so that our actions are not limited to press statements, to mere condemnations, so that at least they can see that we're quite, serious. Our petition is still before the Code of Conduct Bureau, but at least we've seen some effects, because the governor came on here to say that he didn't make that statement well, he was apologizing, and so on and so forth. But we still want the due process to take its course. Let him state that before a constitutionally constituted authority, such as the Code of Conduct Bureau. And in terms of way forward, we're looking at a very big landscape. I was impressed with the submission made by George about some of the steps to be taken in Sierra Leone. I feel that the media needs to put its stars together in Nigeria. We need to see media proprietors, need to see the guild being more proactive when it comes to how this COVID-19 is affecting the media. We've had a lot of responses, but I think we've gotten to a stage where these organizations, because they are umbrella groups, they have larger constituencies, could actually begin to directly speak to the government to demand some concessions, to demand firm assurances that their members will not be harassed. And for me, it's not out of place, if this trend continues, for us to take the kind of action that the Nigerian Medical Association has taken in Lagos State, for example, where doctors who were on their legitimate duty were arrested because of a supposed curfew, and they said that doctors should stay at home. Now, if we continue to have this, these are also some of the options we need to look at, to say that if the safety of journalists are not assured, then we're not giving assurance that we will cover the activities of the Presidential Task Force. I think we need to send some signals. And I also feel, however, that there has to be some form of dialogue that would, because the demand we need to make now is to say that, look, the president has recognized the media as a frontline institution, but the actions we're seeing on the field completely negate the pronouncement of the president. Can we then have a proper directive that can be communicated down, not just at the level of the Inspector General of Police, but the State Commissioner of Police, and then the divisional police officers?
Right. Thank you very much, Lanre. Delving deeper into the solutions, I would want to find out from each of us, what do we think would work? How can we stem this? How can we prevent these things from happening so that journalists would have the freedom to operate? And we can look at this from the perspective of what the role of government and government agencies must be, what the role of those of us, you've already highlighted some of the great works that you do, statements, condemnations, and all that. But beyond these, what specific actions can we take? And then also, it's important to look at the role of the international agencies and organizations in our countries. UNESCO, for example, almost every country, there is a UNESCO local office. And I think Nigeria even hosts one of the sub-regional units of UNESCO, UNDP, and the other UN agencies. The foreign missions, some of which support the work that we do. In what ways or what role can they play in helping the efforts at the country level to improve the conditions for journalists? So, Sowa, if I may come to you first, how do we deal with this? How can we, if not root it out completely, reduce the number of incidents and the gravity of violations against journalists? And added to that, we can also look at the role and responsibility of media organizations themselves. So here we are looking at government agencies, the media support organizations such as the associations and NGOs like us, international actors in the country and even from outside, and then also the media organizations themselves. If you can prescribe some interventions that can be undertaken going forward.
All right, Sule, can you get me?
Yes.
All right, let me start by saying that the fundamental problem between and among journalists, state authorities, and some other institutions, it has to do with understanding the roles of the different players. So an understanding of those roles at different points in time is a fundamental problem. And I take an example from the MFWA support to MRCG at the peak of the elections, where we had the police-media dialogue. That dialogue, the outcome of that dialogue, clearly pointed out to the fact that there was a serious issue in terms of understanding the roles, the functions, and the limitations of the different institutions. So going at the highest level of government agencies, I believe that there should be series of dialogues across different security sector institutions together with media institutions. That is where national media institutions come into play. I am not sure that those roles are clearly defined and those functions are clearly articulated. In the absence of the understanding of those roles and functions, then such problems will always continue to exist. I also believe that when it comes to the issue of safety and security, national media institutions have to take the lead. Going back to what Lanre said, it is not only a question of the altercations between journalists and security sector institutions. Like Nigeria, also in Sierra Leone, there is the bigger problem of safety of journalists, even by the way they approach the coverage and reportage on COVID-19. They do so with little or no knowledge on their own safety, which is why I made the point about the existence of no guidelines or manual as to how such things ought to be done. So that is why, as a national media organization, MNCG, not in the next couple of days, we are going to roll out a very big initiative, building the capacity of media practitioners on issues of COVID-19, first with their own safety as individuals, and then with their interaction with security sector institutions. And we are going to move forward to developing some basic guidelines or manuals that guarantees their safety as individuals in terms of executing their job. So national media organizations have to step up. And that is why I also feel, Sule, that the capacity of national media organizations across West Africa, in my view, particularly Sierra Leone, leaves much to be desired. You cannot advocate what you don't know. You cannot advocate what you don't have competency and capacity about. So we need to build up the capacity. And the national media regulatory body, for example, in Sierra Leone, the IMC itself has to be provided with the requisite support and capacity. For example, we are talking about COVID-19. There has been no support to the very national media institution, the regulatory body. All the body has done and come from its own little resources. So we'd like to see national media organizations step up in terms of in articulating those issues. State authorities should implement measures that ensure freedom of expression and that also promotes safety of journalists. So for example, a big issue now has to do with trials. We have seen that journalists are being detained, journalists are being prosecuted, and they are being tried. Here is the point. Across Africa, you have lockdowns or you have a national state of emergencies. So for example, even in Sierra Leone, the journalist who was arrested and is being prosecuted, when the Chief Justice closed the court sittings because of fears or concerns about COVID-19, that case came to a halt. So we also need to see speedy trials of our colleagues who come in conflict with the law. And we expect regional organizations like MFWA to intensify the monitoring of press freedom cases. I have come to realize that aside COVID, for example, the MRCG has a press freedom monitoring report where we have documented dozens of cases about the way journalists had come in conflict with the law. Unfortunately, we don't have logical conclusion of most of those cases. Sometimes the journalists will start to pursue the matter because of little or no support from state institutions like the police. They drop those matters. That is why I feel regional bodies and then international organizations working on press freedom or supporting the government should also come in to ensure that the rights of journalists are protected. But also, welfare of journalists, in my view, is a fundamental safety issue at a time like this. Already, the very poor media institutions that cannot upkeep themselves even during normal times are suffering seriously to an extent that a good number of them cannot operate fully, and by extension, they cannot pay their staff. So the welfare is not only about journalists being beaten, it is also about the capacity of media institutions to pay their staff, to cater for their well-being and their safety. It will interest you to know that even basic safety measures cannot be found in some media houses. Journalists go out to cover stories, they are not protected. And lastly, for now, I think we should learn from our experience and at the regional level and national level and try to begin to build the capacity of journalists on reporting on emergencies, disasters, and crises. Because it appears as if these things are now with us. Sadly, even the West African countries, we did not learn enough from Ebola. With Corona, it seemed as if we are starting almost from the scratch. So we need to develop some kinds of guidelines, some kinds of manuals, some kinds of capacity building too, so that our journalists will be capacitated to roll out programs and activities related to COVID-19. In summary, the safety of journalists goes beyond the altercations they have with journalists. It is also a media sustainability issue. It is a media poverty issue. And it is also the inability of media institutions even to function properly in normal times, and not to talk about times of crisis.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Lanre, beyond all the great works that you are doing in Nigeria, what else can we do? What else should we be doing to guarantee the safety of journalists in a country as vast as Nigeria? And if you can do that within some 2-3 minutes, that would be great. Then I'll come to George and hear him on the issue of not just what those of us in civil society can do, but government regulatory bodies such as the National Media Commission, what they can also do. So Lanre, what else should we be doing that we are not able to do or we are not doing for one reason or the other? And going forward, what should we be doing?
Well, I was also reading the comments by Rihanna in terms of how do we have greater collaboration across the region. So for me, I think that at this stage, we need to consolidate what we are doing in the individual countries. Media organizations, civil society groups in Nigeria need to come together, speak with one voice when journalists' rights are violated. We need to encourage media umbrella organizations, professional bodies and associations to have dialogue with government, especially when it comes to the question of the economic hardship they are facing, and to that extent, the welfare of journalists. There are a number of demands we've made before now in terms of concessions that government could grant the media, the broadcast media, for example. Could there be a waiver of licensing fees for now? Could there be a waiver of tariffs on the inputs that the media use? These are legitimate demands that could actually help the media. But I would rather think that we now need to also look at the subcontinental level. For example, we have ECOWAS. We have all these violations. I feel that regional organizations of which we are partners, for example, IPC is a partner of Media Foundation for West Africa. Both of us are members of the African Freedom of Exchange. At the level of these organizations, we can begin to make representation to these institutions. For example, it would be good if we could get ECOWAS, maybe the relevant authorities within ECOWAS itself, like maybe the Office of the Special Rapporteur on Information, or any one of them, to come out with a statement asking member states to recognize the role that journalists play in this COVID-19 and demanding that journalists should be given all the support they need, including the cessation of all this harassment. So we need to move to a higher level. Of course, we have not exhausted all the levels in our respective countries. We have our legislatures or parliaments. We can go there, we can do all this, but we need to now act within the context of the sub-region. So we need to make representation to ECOWAS, and through AFEX, for example, we can also make representation to the African Union. And for crying out loud, we have the AU Charter on Peoples and Human Rights that provides a framework for the protection of journalists. Almost all our governments are parties to this charter. They are signatories to it. As a matter of fact, that charter is even part of the Nigerian constitution. So I feel that we can begin to activate sub-regional and regional instruments, authorities, engaging them and asking them to come out with a statement. So what I'm saying in effect is that we need a more collaborative effort for us to come out with clear directions as to where we should go as far as COVID-19 is concerned. Within that context, I feel that we should improve on our information sharing and information exchange mechanisms. We need to operate on the principle of an injury to one is an injury to all. So if journalists are attacked in Nigeria, it shouldn't just be Nigeria organization speaking. Media Foundation should speak, and they have been speaking. We need to hear more. If it's happening in Sierra Leone, nothing says that we cannot have acts of solidarity. So if we do this, I believe that it would help our cause and finally our cause. And finally, I think for us here in Nigeria, we need more strategic engagement with the state institutions, especially the security agencies. Often the perpetrators of attacks are those of lower ranks, except in instances where the order comes from the state governor or the commissioner of police. We need strategic engagement with the top hierarchies of the security agencies for them to understand that journalists have an important role to play as far as the fight against COVID-19 is concerned.
Thank you very much, Lanre. George, your role elsewhere in the region, sometimes the regulatory bodies are actually even used to suppress, intimidate, and abuse the rights of journalists. So as a regulator, I mean, as a lawyer yourself and somebody serving in your capacity as the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission here in Ghana, and I know you have, in the course of your work, interacted with your counterparts in some of the countries in the region. What can be done by regulatory bodies such as yours and then also by organizations such as us, the international partners that you frequently deal with and all of that, going forward in terms of improving the conditions of safety for our journalists?
Thank you very much, Sule. I think both Francis and Lanre have shared very significant ideas that I think we need to pursue. All that I would add is that develop a regional framework for the safety and sustainability of media in times of crisis. And we need to work together to do this as soon as we can. On the regulatory side, there are two things that I think we need to do. One is for all of us regulators to quickly conduct regulatory impact analysis of crisis on media sustainability and to factor that into mainstreaming media policy. The questions that both Francis and Lanre raised about, for example, regulatory fees for licensed media, including broadcasting, are questions that regulators need to deal with immediately. But the most fundamental control the media. I would rather we shifted towards a more facilitating approach to media regulation. It is important for us to understand that we exist as regulators only because there is media, and that the very essence of our work is the survival and sustenance of the media. If there is no open, democratic, pluralistic media, nobody needs a regulator. Okay. Let us understand that whilst media perform public service essentially in the public interest, there is a sense that there are individuals who have invested their resources in order to promote that public good. And their survival and sustainability should be the primary concern of regulators. So we need to towards a more facilitating role that enables us to work with the media industry towards promoting an environment that is free, open, and sustain a democratic media. So in short, I would repeat by saying all of us stakeholders really need to work together towards developing a regional framework for the safety and sustainability of media in the region. For regulators, I think that we need to immediately begin to do regulatory impact analysis of this pandemic on media and perhaps plan against any kind of future crisis. But above all, what we need to do is a change in the culture of regulations.
So, George, just before I go to someone, there's a question here for you that says that all the government communications in Ghana around COVID-19 are targeted at those who can hear, who can read, who can see, forgetting about those that are blind, deaf, and so on. Is the National Media Commission doing anything to target these other groups? This is not really about safety, but you may just want to pass a comment on that.
I think that it's a fundamental question of safety along three dimensions. One, the safety of our people within the disability community, because they also need the information to protect their own safety within the pandemic. But also, let us acknowledge in the specific case of Ghana that a certain attempt, at least at the media briefings, is made to reach those with hearing disabilities. But I think all of us need to do more, particularly for those who are visually impaired and people with many other forms of disability. And I think that I would rather take the question as a comment or as a suggestion that all of us need to do more in respect of our brothers and sisters within the disability community to ensure that we can carry society together. Mind you, the greatest test of our success would be how the most vulnerable feel at the end of the day.
Right. Mr. Sowa, there is one question here that how do we deal with the issue of state officials sometimes putting out false information, such as what was put out by the EOC in Sierra Leone, and then when journalists take up the same information and broadcast and it turns out later to be false, then the same journalists are arrested for publicizing fake news?
Well, let me just put that, are you getting me, Sule?
Yes.
Okay, let me just put that into context quickly. It's similar to what George has just spoken about, the daily press briefing. So the EOC is the Emergency Operations Center. They have their briefings every day where they give updates on COVID-19. So yes, the person is very correct. There have been instances in which the EOC will give a report about an issue, and then they will come the next day to make clarifications or corrections. So I will think that the only thing the journalists will need to do is to report everything as was stated in the EOC. And then if they come to it the next day and that is reported, then that cannot amount to false publication because they themselves will have got it from EOC. So most times, Sule, it's more a question of attribution. So that clearly attributing that this thing came from EOC. So if it turned out the next day not to be true or not to be correct, that responsibility does not shift to the reporter. So there have been an instance in which some people reported something which turned out not to be true the other day, and then responsibility was sort of shifted to them. But if they clearly attribute those statements to EOC, and the EOC comes out later to say that is not true, it is only the business of the journalist to report the other version of the EOC, and that cannot amount to false information because they are merely reporting that which was said at the EOC press briefing.
Well, I think that is right because it is not just in Sierra Leone. We currently have a case in Benin where a journalist basically took the quote from the state prosecutor. And later when the prosecutor felt that this statement, if put out and the authorities see it and may be in trouble, what they did was to arrest the journalist for publicizing false news. And that is a matter that has put the journalist in jail, and only yesterday or so, they had the jail sentence reduced, but he still has some 1 month to serve in detention. George, there is a question that says that you shared a concern about the Electronic Communications Act and how provisions in it are being used to raise concerns about the publication or to criminalize the publication of false news. Beyond the concerns that has been expressed, is the National Media Commission going to take steps to ensure that this law is not used in a way that would abuse the freedoms of people by merely saying that what somebody has published is false news and therefore it contravenes the law?
Oh, sure. The Commission is already having discussions around the issue, and we strongly believe that this nation has come very far in terms of opening up the media space, and that is going to be preserved. But we also need to recognize that there's a certain balancing that needs to be done. Certainly, fake news and disinformation that can endanger the totality of the society needs to be addressed. We think that all stakeholders need to work together to find the most democratic way of dealing with that.
Right, thank you very much. George, maybe to you again, because this question is from Ghana, and it is actually from the president of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. And he says, my question is, what role is the media regulator has played in leading in safety for journalists, safe discussions, and especially, okay, so he says this is particularly in Ghana. So basically, the role of the regulator in ensuring that journalists are safe and ensuring that journalists do their conversations in an atmosphere of safety. I think you may have responded to that in your previous submissions, but just in case you want to say a word or two.
Yes, also because I think that Andy wants us to highlight the fact that we have had to coordinate the various media groups in terms of what constitutes the best approach to securing journalist safety and all. So I just indicated to you that we working together with the media groups, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, the leadership of the state-owned media, the Private Newspaper Publishers Association, and the Ghana Journalists Association have put together a number of proposals to government in terms of what can be done to safeguard the media environment, the media business, journalists and their safety. And the government has given us strong assurance that they are considering that. And in response to that, I've already provided us some basic PPEs, including some masks and gloves that were recently distributed to the media through the Ghana Journalists Association and to a certain extent, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association.
All right, thank you so much. It's 2:47 or 14:27 GMT. We scheduled this to end at 14:30 GMT. So this, I believe, is all that time would allow us to do for today. So far, there has been really great suggestions and I have learned a lot. I think the other thing we need to look at is internet connection across the region. Of course, the point about an important point. As I did say from the beginning, this is the first in the series of conversations like this going forward. The next one would be next week, and it would be announced for the Francophone part of West Africa to also have a convening and gather their thoughts and ideas going forward. Then, of course, we plan to have a session on media and security agencies relations, and that we will have speakers from the security agencies in our respective countries. And the big question around media sustainability, and George has made the point about having a regional framework on media safety and media sustainability in times of crisis. That is something that I believe we need to look at certainly. So to all of you, Lanre, George, and Mrs. Sowa in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Ghana, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us. And to all our amazing participants, thank you very much for your questions, for your time. And we look forward to continuous engagement with you as we try to deal with the challenges within the media environment in West Africa.